Hi, my name is Marie Myung-Ok, and I'm really excited to be here for the Bellevue Literary Review. I'm the author of this new novel, The Evening Hero, which takes place in the world of medicine, among other things. And while I was working on the book, I followed a lot of doctors around, spent time in the hospital, particularly a good friend of mine who is an OBGYN, just like Myung-Ok Kwok, the protagonist of my novel. And when I was following her around, the novel's actually taken me 18 years to write. And in those years, including during COVID, I remember remarking to my friend that I admired so much that while I'm sitting here sort of sequestered and cloistered in my apartment, trying to finish my novel, she was out there risking her life, helping people. But then she said that one of the reasons she particularly loved taking the time to take me around the hospital and introduce me to people, she's an avid reader. And she has a very strong philosophy on the healing power of literature, particularly about how literature can help build empathy, grow worlds, and even for herself, she finds literature one way to help her get rid of maybe baked in assumptions that she has about the world. So seeing it through her eyes really made me kind of look at what I did anew. So the novel has to do with a elderly OBGYN who is in rural Minnesota. He's been at the same hospital pretty much his whole career. He's a Korean immigrant who survived Japanese colonialism and the Korean War. But in this little town, nobody really thinks about that. They only see him as the guy who delivers the babies. And what's happening, I'm going to be reading pretty much from the very beginning, is after today, everything's going to change. But he doesn't quite know it yet because it's a few hours off in the future. William Y. Kwok, MD, Horse's Breath, Minnesota, 2000. Youngman's office was strategically placed between the surgical suites and the labor and delivery rooms. You walked by the imaging room whose door had a sign that said, "Please do not smoke during your ultrasound." Then through a door with a sign that said, "Maternity ward," and "Push, push, push," above its automatic opener. This heavy door kept the noise of the ambulances out, but Youngman was always imagining he heard sirens. Youngman waved to his secretary Rose, whose half-size office was umbilically connected to his. She had left his white coat on its hanger behind the door, pressed and cleaned and sheathed in protective plastic. Suddenly, Youngman remembered the letter. He patted his jacket pocket. Ooh, still dry. He opened the slim middle drawer of his desk and placed it in the back, even beyond his RX pad and stash of Tic Tacs. He checked the ER whiteboard. His longtime patient, Mrs. Mackey, had called him at home this morning, complaining of indigestion. She wasn't due for 2 more weeks, but she tended to deliver fast. 3 children, each labor faster than the previous. So he told her to come in, just to be safe. Especially since recent cuts meant fewer ambulances were available. Of course, this would add to his workload. Normally, Maud, his nurse midwife, could do the workup and the monitoring, but there had been sporadic layoffs for months. It seemed there was no more flesh to cut, but she had been a casualty of last week's Friday night massacre, along with Kate Javerina, the hospital social worker. "We all have to do more with less," said Tinklenberg, the hospital CEO, "if we're going to keep Horse's Breath General viable in this market." "Market?" Youngman scoffed to himself. They were talking human beings, not rubber balls or boxes of cereal. CEO Tinklenberg's predecessor, who'd been with the hospital more than 20 years, had been an MD with a master's in public health. Tinklenberg was an MBA brought in 2 years ago by the private management company Synergistic Action Network-US Health Systems, which had made the tantalizing promise to the Board of Trustees that Horse's Breath General would be debt-free in a mere 2 to 5 years. The precipitously aging and dwindling population of the town meant a shakier financial footing. The hospital could regain its former stability if they gave Tinklenberg free rein to do his magic. But all they'd seen so far was fewer staff, fewer supplies, even basics like IV saline and Tylenol were troublingly often in short supply. Telephone problems, which used to get fixed right away, languished for days. Also, their ER had been downgraded one trauma level, then another. The new sign at the entrance read, "Minor injury only, not 24-hour. For emergency, please dial 911. So if I can talk about my own 911, I'd love to talk about how important literary magazines are to new writers. When I was first starting out as a writer, I was working at an investment bank, knowing that I was going to someday be a writer, but not knowing how. And literary magazines were really my only connection to the world of letters. People in banking tend to not be that interested in literature. And so that was one of the few places, and it took many years, but that when I first published a story, a short story, I finally felt like I could call myself a writer. And that had always been such an important part of my, not only my career development, but also just having the mental sort of resiliency to go on pursuing art, which is always a very tricky proposition. And so what's very special about the Bellevue Literary Review is it is the only journal that focuses on health, illness, and healing. It was probably over 25 years ago, and I remember this also because it was before the internet, when a friend of mine in my writing group showed me this beautiful story she'd written about a Japanese-American family and the question of a young person in the family donating a kidney to an elderly person. And it was a beautifully nuanced story that also had to do a lot with culture and how people feel about the body and filial responsibilities. And she told me that she was thinking of sending it into the Bellevue Literary Review. And she did end up getting the piece accepted. And that's how I found out about the wonderful Bellevue Literary Journal, which I enjoy reading regularly. So I would ask that if continuing these kinds of literary journals is important to you, particularly this very unique journal, I would suggest that you make a donation today and take out a subscription. Because among other things, your support will help new voices come to the table. You may or may not know that these literary magazines are one of the ways that literary agents find their clients, and that publishers sometimes find new people to publish. I do know that when I first started publishing, that was one of the few ways from my banker bubble that I could kind of send my writer self out into the world. And that was kind of my representation. And I was so grateful